So today we're going to talk about the grape vineyard. In this grape vineyard we have muscadine grapevines and Cabernet Sauvignon, or Cab. They're both wine grapes at some level. A lot of people make muscadine wine, but they grow very differently from each other. So as you can see, these ones are very hardy and healthy and actually grow native in the woods here. The trellising on the left are actual native plants that I dug up from the very forest that we put our house in. And the ones on the right here, those were actual bought from a nursery. And of course we have bamboo everywhere, because why wouldn't you have bamboo everywhere? So the way they grow is quite different. The cabs are a lot more finicky. And as you can see, what we did is we gave them a rejuvenation pruning because the vines on top actually died back. So to counteract having sick plants, what I did was I cut them down at the stalk, right at the bottom. I left about 7 to 8 inches off the ground, as you can see right there, a very clear cut. And they've just started to pop out. Now, they didn't all come back. The 3 years where I barely took care of them, they had no one to tend to them, no one to spray them. We have a lot of pest pressure. It was quite difficult to actually maintain. But as you can see, these ones are starting to shoot back out. And what we're going to do with them is I'm actually going to take that one vine that's coming off, and we're going to drive it straight up to the lower leader and the top leader of the trellising. It's got 2 levels. Now, I want you to look at the grass here too. It's not just grass. A lot of it is intentional planting of cover cropping. In fact, most of it is, and that's why you can see the flowering and everything else. We've planted clover and other varieties of native plants to actually add for nitrogen fixing, so that this requires no, if any, fertilization. So this is actually the split level trellising that I was talking about. We have a lower leader and then we have an upper leader. We'll drive the vines up and we'll tie them onto both. Since we're going to have one vine going straight up, in the next year and maybe during this year it's going to go out to both sides, but who knows how that's going to go this year. I'm planning next year that they'll go out left and right. So another thing I want to talk about here is drainage. This is a flat plain right here where we are, and it lowers down by the muscadines where water pools. And that goes along with the variety that you're planting. Which one can survive with what they call wet feet or dry feet. Cabs like dry, muscadines like wet. So this is off to the right of them. These were kiwis that I actually assumed were completely dead, but I gave them a rejuvenation pruning as well, and as you can see, they're coming back. Kiwis like heavy watering, deep soil watering, which is why we use these deep soil watering tubes, but they also don't like wet feet. So those are on the highest point in the vineyard. And as my property is one giant trellis after the next, they're on the top trellis. So let's talk about pH. I have blueberries, apples, and grapes in the exact same space. The pH is different on all 3 of these spots. We keep the pH on the lower level very acidic. I do no amendments, minus maybe some peat moss. And you can see that it has a low pH, a high pH up top. And I do the amendments there, and it slowly drains there and dissipates before it actually gets to the blueberries, or in the more acidic spot. Now these were an overflow of the Cabernet when I built the first vineyard. I didn't want to have them too close together, but either way, it works out. And as you can see, I've got my pH pretty good. The apple trees are huge, they're blooming like crazy, and this is a really good example of permaculture with a little bit of conventional intermix between them, because we don't do a whole lot of interplanting, but we do interplant a vineyard with our orchard, and we even intermix our pHs, but we have to plan for that. So you have to make sure that when you are planning out your vineyard and or orchard, that your pH has to come into a factor, especially if you're going to intercrop. You have less space and you need to put as many plants in one spot as you can. The quickest way for us to actually raise and lower the pH is to basically only focus on raising the pH. The soil is already very acidic where we live, which is what gives it that very red color. These blackberries are planted right next to the blueberries and the apple trees, and they require a little bit of a neutral pH, but they can exist in either, and they are native to this soil. So we had no problem integrating them. And the way we actually do raise or lower the pH is we use potash. Potash is essentially just ash from the fireplace or a fire pit. And make sure it's hardwood. We don't like to use a lot of pine, and we don't use any conventional treated lumber. So you got to remember that. You can see that we don't really do any weed control. We definitely don't spray any herbicides, that's for sure. A lot of these plants, they are nitrogen fixing, and they grow underneath these fruiting crops and actually just add fertilizer to them. It's beneficial to actually grow things together. And you can grow things that are at a higher and lower pH in the same vicinity, as long as you take precautions and steps to make sure that everything has exactly what they need. Now, we have these very close, and a lot of people tell you that you cannot grow them that close, but our soil is proving to be beneficial for both high and low pHs within feet of each other. So there's no reason why I think you can't grow something like that right next door to something else. I did plant part of the blueberries in the lowest spot, which is actually where we plant the muscadines, and they will sit in water for a little bit, or at least water will pool here. It's not as high on this end of the orchard as it is over by the muscadines, but just because we plant everything on a slope, and right to the right of here is actually a berm which creates the terrace. They do pretty well. I have some hopes for them, but then again, these are the lowest point that I've planted blueberries yet, so that remains to be seen. So that's a little bit about trying to interplant your fruiting crops. Remember, your pH levels need to be different per plant, and if you have a sloped incline, you can actually maintain certain pHs at different levels based on the way the plants need. And of course, the bamboo is beautiful, especially early in the morning. So we're trying to learn to live with this monster. Thanks, everybody.